D.
Okay, I think we are, sounds like our translation systems are working. I heard something in another language, which is fantastic. Okay, so welcome everybody. We are going to be recording this evening's session for families that wanted to come but were not available to join us tonight, so that this way they'll have a chance to watch it, or if you want to share it with a spouse, partner, significant other at a later date, you'll also be able to do that. Also, when we record and we post it on YouTube, then we can turn on language translations to make the content accessible in a variety of languages. Emma, would you like to welcome folks in Spanish and just tell them about the subtitles and also the audio?
Yes. Buenas noches y bienvenidos a esta sesión de transición de pre-kinder a kindergarten. Y les queremos, como ven, están con subtítulos porque la clase es en inglés, al igual que les vamos a poner un código en el chat para que puedan entrar por una aplicación de traducción al español. Si tienen alguna pregunta, por favor pónganlo en el chat. Y gracias. Okay, Kathleen.
Okay, thank you. And we're already recording, Emma? Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'd like to thank and ask my dear colleague, Karen Agate, to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Karen Agate, and I'm one of the preschool child find coordinators, and I recognize some of the names who are popping up as you all are joining the call. So I'm here to help Kathleen answer any questions and talk about the pre-K to K transition and kind of how the IEP kind of works within that transition.
Great. And I'm Kathleen Donovan. I work at the Special Education Parent Resource Center with Emma Pearl, who just greeted you. Emma is our bilingual administrative assistant, and I'm also joined by another colleague, the wonderful Gina DeSalvo, who may pop on at some point later this evening. We're a small team of 3, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Parent Resource Center on the next slide. Typically, when we offer learning sessions like this and record it, we usually try to respond to questions in the chat as we're going along. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you're welcome to do that, but please note that it will be part of the recording. So typically what we do is when we get through all of the slides, we'll stop the recording and then just have an open venue to ask questions that will not be recorded. So if you'd like to hold your questions, that might be a little bit easier, but certainly if you need clarification, just pop a note in the chat or let us know. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Special Education Parent Resource Center, we are part of our Arlington Public Schools, and we are your Parent Resource Center. Our goal is to support you as you collaborate and work with the wonderful teams of staff that are working with your children in school. We know that the more engaged you are, the better your children do in school, so we are here to support you and collaborate with you and learn with and from you through our outreach. We offer individual consultations with families who have questions about connecting with community resources or want to know, next steps for their child, or maybe learn how to prepare for an IEP meeting. So you can always set up a time to meet with Gina or I. You can do that online, and we'll put our information in the chat a little bit later. We also do a lot of work with our community partners, such that we have a wonderful special education PTA. It's called SEPTA, Arlington SEPTA. We work closely with them and our school advisory committee, as well as many nonprofits in the community that support the disability community. We have a lending library with lots of print materials, and new in the last year or so, we now have electronic books and audiobooks, and probably in the next Monday message or sometime by mid-February, we're going to be pushing out some new resources on how you can access our lending library information. We do have some books on the transition to kindergarten, so if you'd like to borrow any of those, please let us know. And then finally, we offer lots of parent and staff learning opportunities like this, where we can come together and learn from each other, ask questions, hopefully get answers to those questions, and support parents being informed members of their children's team. We'll put our phone number and our email address in the chat in a little bit. I know it looks like it's a little blurry on my screen. I'm not sure if it's blurry on yours. Also in the chat, I'm going to, in a moment, put a link to the presentation slide. So after this session, The recording, along with all of the slides and the links and some other helpful information, will be available online. So we'll share that with you as well, so you can follow along and check that out at home. Okay, so a little bit about the word transition. This is, we offer these sessions because we know that transitions are, significant changes for us. And indeed, the definition of a transition is the process or period of changing from one state or condition to another. And in our case, our little pre-K friends are moving on to kindergarten. So they're going to be going to a new program, a new grade, perhaps a new school. And this transition is going to be happening next fall in September. So we're really glad that you are taking time now to learn more about how you can prepare for and support your child through this transition. Thought it was interesting that the derivative of this word transition comes from the French or from Latin, to go across. So as you are going across from pre-K to kindergarten, we hope that you'll think of Karen and myself as resources to support you in your travels. So love now for some audience participation. Would love you to type in the chat how you're feeling about your child's transition. What words come to mind when you think about your child's transition? Thank you for those who are responding. We really appreciate that. All right, so far we are seeing both excited and nervous. I see some anxiety, confident that all will go well. That's great. Not ready. I know I have a 24 and a 26-year-old, and I still feel like I'm not ready for them to go to kindergarten. It just goes really fast. So thank you for those of you who shared mixed feelings. Excited, we'll miss the pre-K teachers. I know we have such amazing pre-K teachers. We also have amazing kindergarten teachers too. Lots of mixed feelings, mixed emotions, and some worry. And we're not surprised, that those are common feelings. Many families feel happy about this. They're excited. Kids think kindergarten, they're going to get to go with the big kids. Maybe they have an older brother or sister that they might be joining in a school. Enthusiastic, lots to look forward to as they become, elementary school students. Worried, very common. A lot of you said that, and anxious. So that's part of why we offer this session, is to make sure that you hopefully acknowledge those feelings, be aware of those feelings, because, whenever we're making decisions, we're trying to do two things. We're thinking about the decisions, but when we're experiencing a lot of big feelings, it's hard to make focused decisions. So I'm always glad for families to know how they're feeling, be in touch with those feelings, think about them, and then, manage them so that you can then be prepared to make decisions as part of your child's team as you advocate for your child moving forward. All right. Now this also, we're a relatively small group, would love you to take a moment and let us know in the chat, if you will, what would you like to know about the transition tonight? What questions might you have? What are you hoping we'll address? So we'll just take another few seconds and let you respond to that question. Okay, so I see we have at least one question. Karen, do you see any more questions than that, or just one right now?
Two questions, three. I see, how will we know if our child is ready? Let me see. My child will need an IEP, and I don't know how to get one for her prior to kindergarten. I'm glad you joined tonight. I can help assist with that. Is there any play in kindergarten? The next question is, how do kids do with a transition to a larger class? What sorts of services are offered? Is it predominantly in-class help or other? What are the major differences in pre-K and K? How to best prepare children to start kindergarten? Is it common or possible to remain another year like I did for a neurotypical child? I'm thinking that maybe that question is asking if your child can remain in pre-K for an additional year. This one I'm going to let Emma take. Emma, can you see the question?
Yes.
Okay.
How are they going to measure the special education services for my child?
Yep. And we will answer that. There was one that just said yes. So I guess you do have questions. How is school chosen? And that's all that I see. So I think we'll touch on all of that in just a few minutes.
Great. And so hopefully, as Karen said, we'll touch on those going through the presentation. And again, we'll pause. For those of you who joined late, we'll stop at the end and be sure that we've addressed all of your questions. Thank you for sharing all of those. So I think there was a question of like, which child, which school will my child attend? At this point in time, most Arlington kindergartners go to school in their neighborhood home school. So you may or may not be aware that Arlington is divided up by boundaries. And if you have a question about what boundary your home is actually in, we can help you with that, after the session, or you can schedule a time to talk with us. So every child can attend their neighborhood school, but there are also a couple of option schools. The option schools currently include Arlington Traditional School, which is a lottery admission school. There are language immersion schools at Escuela Key and Claremont. Campbell has an expeditionary learning program. There's also a Montessori program. So there are some options, and those are open. Those are options that are available to all families, whether or not your child receives special education services. Part of why we scheduled this session at this point in the year is we want you to be prepared prior to the bigger district-wide kindergarten information night that will be held on January 31st. This year, it will actually be virtual, and I think it's really just a recorded session, but it'll become available apparently at 6:30 p.m. So you can tune in right then and watch it, but we'll be sure to let you know when that session will be. And during the kindergarten information night, you'll get to hear about your neighborhood schools, but also hear a lot more about those option schools and what they're like. So the first thing we encourage families to think about is, what is your family's preference and choice for a school? Are you happy to go to your home school? Would you like to explore some of those option schools? So you make those decisions, but then you also want to factor in your child's IEP and work with your child's current IEP team if they have an IEP right now, because there might also be certain programs that might be considered as part of the IEP team. And we'll talk a little bit about that next. So Karen is now going to tell you a little bit about what transition planning is underway and how this transition happens.
Okay. So all of our rising kindergartners who do have IEPs, your student's special education teacher will be scheduling that IEP meeting with you and with the receiving school. I know a lot of our pre-K special education students are receiving services in their neighborhood elementary school, so that makes for a really nice transition. For some students that may be at a different location other than their neighborhood school, our teachers will be reaching out early spring, late winter to go ahead and get that meeting scheduled so that you guys can talk about the difference in services, rate goals that would be appropriate for meeting those kindergarten standards of learning that the Virginia Department of Education outlines. And really talking about breaking down those services to see how best that child can meet those goals. So maybe some time might be a special education teacher pushing into the classroom in the general education setting. Maybe your child needs more of a special education setting and only going into the general education setting for a shorter period of time during the day. They'll talk about what related services look like, if it would be push in or pull out services. So services in that general education classroom versus services in the therapy room with that related service provider, such as the OT, the physical therapist, or the speech therapist. If your child has some vision services or audiology services, those will also be outlined in the IEP, same as they are now, but the IEP will be broken down to specify exactly what location that level of service will occur in, and for the duration, what that time period looks like. I know some of our pre-K IEPs are just general for maybe the 30 hours minus the related service providers. We're really looking at breaking down instruction and instructional goals to look and see what type of support and where that support needs to happen during the school day. So we have student support coordinators that work in our schools. They are there to help support the special education students in the process, work with the administration. They may participate in some of the IEP meetings, but they're a great resource and act as a nice bridge between the pre-K and the K special education services. Okay, you guys are also a part of this process. I know there's some questions about what that might look like going into that school. Hopefully this year, again, schools will hold an open house, so you can actually go in and see what a kindergarten program looks like, what a little snapshot of that day looks like. And remember, these kids are a year ahead of where your kids are now. So they've had that time to develop a lot of those skills. So when you go in, you may feel like, oh, my child is not there yet, but these kids weren't there yet either when they started in kindergarten. But you guys will work with the kindergarten team and with your current special education teacher and related service providers to draft those goals. And the receiving school staff will have a heads up from the special education teacher, knowing that your child will be coming to them for kindergarten. If that is, unless you choose a choice school. Sometimes when families do apply for the choice school and the IEP may be expiring closer to the time that you may not know if your child was accepted to Campbell or ATS or Montessori Public, we can still go ahead and draft that IEP. That IEP can follow your child wherever they go for kindergarten. So there's no need to re-meet or wait until you find out what school your child was accepted to if you are applying to a choice school. Okay, so it's a big team effort. Sometimes principals like to go out and observe kids. Again, if your child is receiving services at their neighborhood school, that those administrators and related service providers already know your child. And your pre-K special education teacher is really here to kind of support you and guide you all through the process. We know this is a really big step for parents. It's a really big step for our little kids who are preparing to go to kindergarten. So those pre-K, your pre-K special education teacher will be helping you guys drafting goals. They can share links to certain websites that will let you see allow you to understand and know what some of the standards are that we're working on in kindergarten. And they certainly collaborate very well with the receiving school, with the kindergarten teacher to draft those more kind of academic or pre-academic goals that the child will be working on during kindergarten. Okay. All right. Again, some of our principals like to go out and observe students. They definitely will be reviewing the existing IEP to get to know your child. There is, again, a lot of that consultation going on behind the scenes to schedule those meetings, again, draft those appropriate goals with the kindergarten team. And participating in those IEP meetings. Okay, and again, there is a student support coordinator that's assigned to each elementary school. So they will know and have a heads up that your child may potentially be coming to their school, so they're ready for you guys.
And when we share this PDF, the hyperlink should be live. So the link here will bring you to a list of all the schools and the name of their student support coordinator, who's just a great person to ask if you have questions that are not answered. They're working in the receiving school, and they can tell you a little bit about current service delivery models and what special education supports look like. And they're a great team, and they'll work closely with the sending school to ensure that children are set up for success in kindergarten. All righty. Okay, and then the third leg of that stool that we really rely greatly on is you. I often share during this session that I had the great joy of starting my career as a pre-K teacher. I think a pre-K special education teacher, and I think Karen, you might have as well at some point. And back at the time that I was a pre-K teacher in New York City, public schools did not offer pre-K services. So even though I worked very closely with my children and was very attached to their families, when those little ones went off to kindergarten, the only constant member of their team were their parents, because we were in a little separate, small private pre-K. So we really want families. We know you have many, many jobs. You are the chef in your house, you're often the nurse, you're the social scheduler, you're in charge of, you're an accountant, you're the house cleaner. So we know you have a lot of jobs. We really encourage families to feel comfortable being a member of your child's team, because you're often going to be that only constant member. Some of your children may receive special education services throughout their career in Arlington Public Schools. And even though you have wonderful, amazing teams with you, you have a lot of information to share. Especially if your child is going to a new school, you'll be able to share with the team strategies that might have worked in pre-K, or things maybe that didn't work so well, what your child's preferences are, how your child is feeling about school. So our teams really rely greatly on your input as equal members of the team and as decision makers. So one of the things we want families to do is to be proactive. You don't have to do it tomorrow, but make a note to attend or watch now the kindergarten information session so that you're as informed as you can be. Once they announce the school visits that Karen mentioned in February and March, schedule those. And if you're going to be considering a new school, or you're going to a different school, take time and attend those information sessions that we believe will be in person at the schools, to get to know the community that your child and you will be part of once your child makes this transition. And when you've done that and you have a sense of what you're thinking, next steps are, definitely reach out to your pre-K team at your current school and talk with them, share your ideas and thoughts, ask questions. They've supported many children through this transition, so they're a great contact, of course, that can answer questions. But speak to them about when a transition IEP meeting might be held, and how might the receiving school be involved and participate, so that there's a seamless transition and a great flow of information from pre-K to kindergarten. We really, again, it's important to let your team know if you are considering those options schools, and think of yourself as a member of the team that's going to make the decision. And then finally, we'll talk about in a moment some strategies on how you can prepare your child for this transition. I'm trying to see, Karen, if you are coming back now, or...
So I'm just typing in the chat because I was reviewing the questions that were posted. I know somebody asked how to get an IEP. So I recognize a lot of family names here who have already gone through the process, but if you haven't already gone through the process, I'm putting my email in the chat so that you can reach out directly to me to get more information about how to move forward with evaluations for special education.
All right. So for IEPs in kindergarten, the changes that you'll expect really would be changes that would be designed to address the new environment. So there are some changes. I mean, yes, there certainly are opportunities for play in kindergarten, But there are more academics in kindergarten, and the IEP really, I think we want families to think of the IEP as a bridge. You know, if your child has a disability and there's some things interfering from them accessing that general curriculum, the IEP is like a bridge to help them access that education and that kindergarten curriculum. So the IEP should be addressing what their strengths are when you write the IEP this spring again, as well as their educational needs, keeping in mind how does my child's needs match up with the kindergarten curriculum? And then the IEP is the way we develop supports and services to ensure that your child can access that kindergarten curriculum and also work on what they need to be working on. You will be part of the team that determines which program is best for your child. And then, you know, most children, if they're receiving related services, as Karen mentioned, like speech or occupational therapy, and they still need those services, we absolutely continue to provide those in the next level in kindergarten.
Okay, sorry, Kathleen. I did see a question come up that asked if all of our choice schools provided special education services, and every single school in Arlington Public Schools provides special education services if that child requires them. So yes.
Great. All righty. Karen, do you want to talk about transition IEP meetings, or do you want me to keep going?
Sorry, there is one other question that just popped up about choice schools and how to apply. I would go to the kindergarten. Is there a kindergarten information webpage that lists out the choice schools?
Yeah. And then after, typically very shortly after kindergarten information night at the end of the month, there will be a window of time, and those are already posted. So maybe what we can do is, after we stop sharing these slides, we can go to that website together and show you exactly when you'll need to submit those applications.
Okay.
But you have several months. It's not as though you have to do it like within a week or something. There's a nice period of time to allow for visits.
Kathleen, do you know, is there transportation provided to the choice schools?
Yes, if your child is accepted to an option school, then transportation would be provided.
Great, thank you. So I know we've talked a lot about the IEP, but that transition IEP meeting does take place hopefully at the receiving school or with receiving school participation. Again, we walk through the present levels of the academic and functional performance. Again, it's the goals that would drive the level of service, and it's the weaknesses that would drive the goals. Again, we are looking at some more standard-based goals that align with the Virginia Department of Learning standards of learning. And again, we're talking about any accommodations in the IEP that a child might require, whether it's seating accommodations, writing accommodations, noise canceling headphones. All of those things can be written into the IEP if that is what the child requires to access that education. And we're really looking at, you know, what that level of support that the child requires and what that is going to look like. It's not a one size fits all. So if you're going to Campbell, that IEP for all those pre-K students going into kindergarten doesn't look exactly the same. It's really tailored, as Kathleen said, to meet your child's individual needs. Okay.
All righty. And then there are a variety of different special education service delivery models. Karen, do you want me to cover this, or do you want to jump in here?
I'm happy to talk about it if you want. So as you may or may not be familiar, there is that range of service, and we are talking about providing support for a student that really requires that level of service. Sometimes for students who might have some sensory needs or maybe some fine motor needs, we might be looking at a monitor level of service where the occupational therapist may be consulting with the general education and special education team to provide accommodations in the school, in the classroom setting, whether it's seating accommodations, writing accommodations, sensory accommodations, movement breaks, things like that. So that's kind of what a monitor level of service looks like. It's not a direct service from a provider. It's usually related service provider consulting with the classroom teacher, and that teacher is providing that monitor level of service. Or maybe your child might have an audiological monitor of service where they might just be checking in to make sure that they can access that curriculum. Okay. There are services in the general education setting. So we might have a special education teacher push into that classroom to provide that level of service. We also might have a situation where a child is going into a smaller classroom that is considered the special education environment, where they might be in a smaller class size for part or all of the day, working with a special education teacher and maybe other students in that setting. And we do have countywide special education programs. We have a functional life skills program. We have programs, a multi-intervention program for students with autism. We have a deaf and hard of hearing program. And I can't think of,
I think we have a slide that'll cover those.
okay, thanks.
All right. So I think we'll come back to those. And as you work with your child's team, what you're really going to be deciding is, first, what are my child's strengths? Because we always want to acknowledge those. What are my child's needs? And then as part of the team, you'll write goals for all of your child's needs. And, once everyone on the team agrees upon all of those goals and what accommodations and services your child might need, then the team has to determine, what is the least restrictive environment in which we can deliver those services. So we're guided by federal law and state regulations that indicate that whenever possible, we bring services to what we call, when we say general education setting, that means a regular kindergarten class. So there are ways to get, when Karen went through on the previous slide, when we talk about monitoring is a service or a support that happens in general education. So when you look at your child's IEP, you'll see specially designed instruction, and this is actually a real IEP. And this one indicates here that the child was getting 27 and a quarter hours of special education services in a general education setting. So what that means is that there's some special education personnel, either a special education teacher or perhaps an instructional assistant, who is supporting the child in the general education setting. They were also getting 7 hours and 7.5 hours of support in a pullout setting. So sometimes, it can be a combination of those different models of service delivery. Sometimes we believe that the child needs to be pulled out for all or part of the time to access their learning. Other times we feel as though we can deliver that service adequately in the general education classroom. And similarly, when you look down here below at related services like occupational therapy, those decisions would be made whether the occupational therapist is going to come into the kindergarten classroom, or if the child is pulled out, then you would see the services listed over here. And again, parents are part of the team that make those decisions about how much services are provided and where the services are provided. As Karen mentioned, one of the more restrictive placements would be something that we call a county-wide program. And this happens for students whose IEP teams, including parents, believe that they might need a more restrictive setting to learn and to succeed in kindergarten. So we have a deaf and hard of hearing program for students who are deaf and hard of hearing if they need that level of service. There's a functional life skills program that's working really more on like adaptive skills, like children learning how to feed themselves and dress themselves, and not maybe standard of learning academics, but more functional academics. Interlude is another program for students whose disability presents more as an emotional disability, so that they might need a more therapeutic environment. And Interlude is staffed with folks who are used to working with children with emotionally based disabilities, and there's an integrated counseling component, and a clinical school psychologist works very closely with the program. And then finally, MIPA, the acronym, and I apologize, we should have explained that here, and I'll make sure we send that out, but MIPA stands for Multi-Intervention Program for Students with Autism. Some of your children might be what we call a mini MIPA now, and that's a program designed to be usually a lower student to staff ratio, and staffed by teachers who are well trained in providing appropriate and various supports to students with autism. And all of these descriptions also, when you get the PDF, there will be a link there that will help you understand what the differences are between these programs. But typically the staff will consider kindergarten in your neighborhood school as the starting point, and then move to a more restrictive setting from there. So I know a couple of you asked about how to prepare your child. Karen, was that question? Sure.
Emma, I think somebody's waiting to be admitted.
There we go. Thanks. So how you can prepare your child. Again, many of our schools offer open houses, and then they might have orientations or picnics during the spring or play dates. So bring your child to those events, and make sure that your child is familiar with their new school setting. There are lots of great books about kindergarten. And I remember when we have offered this session pre-pandemic, we used to do it live because we didn't have these tools to do things virtually. And it always occurred to me as I was looking across the room that many of your children are they're the pros. They've already been coming to school. They know about backpacks and cubbies. They've been riding a bus, some of them since they were 2. So a lot of the angst sometimes that parents of children who haven't attended pre-K experience, your child might already know the routine. They might, if they're staying in the same school, be very familiar. But there are lots of books about kindergarten out there. If you're going to a new school, one fun thing is to have a play date at the playground so that your child during the summer becomes familiar with their new school. We at the Parent Resource Center always encourage parents to consider writing a parent narrative. The receiving school is going to get your child's IEP, and your child's new case carrier, special ed teacher at the new kindergarten, elementary school is going to be preparing for your child. But sometimes parents just feel better writing a little like introduction to their child. One of my favorites that a parent shared with me, she wrote it from her child's perspective, and it would say like, hi, I'm Josie, and I really love to play outside. My favorite things are to swing on the swings. And sometimes when I get really excited, my body moves around a lot. So I do well if I can take a little break and have movement opportunities. And it was really great. And they had a little like cute picture of their daughter. And teachers love to get that kind of information. And it just helps them start building a relationship with your child, but also with your family. It helps them know what your hopes and dreams are for your child. So certainly feel free, if you'd like to see what some of these parent narratives look like, the Parent Resource Center can share those. We have some that are, not real children, but we can redact the names and share actual real narratives with you. And then finally, there's something called a social story. Some of you might be familiar with this. And Karen, I'm going to take a chance here and try to click out of the session and just see if I can open the social story. This is a social story. We know that many children do well with visuals. So this was something that, and nowadays with iPhones and cameras, it's very easy to take photos. But this was a story that a family made for their child. Let me just see if I can make this a little bit bigger. And if you read down, it'll say, here, well, if we start on the first page, it says, in September, I will go to my new school. Here's the school office where Mrs. Klassen works. Here's the door to my kindergarten. This is Ms. Green. She'll be my teacher in kindergarten. So for children who might struggle with transition, sometimes having this type of support really can be helpful. And you can read a book like this, in the weeks and days preceding this transition. So that is something, and if the Parent Resource Center can help you with that, we're glad to give you some tips on how to do that.
I will also piggyback on that, and you can talk to your student's current teacher to see if they can help write a social story, maybe take some pictures of of the receiving school, you won't find out who your child's teacher is until right before school starts. But I think schools are somewhat flexible in, letting you know so that you can prepare your child.
Mhm.
I also did want to just let families know that there are a lot of things that are naturally occurring in the kindergarten classroom. I know there were a lot of questions or comments about being worried if, their child was ready for kindergarten, or what do some of the things in the kindergarten classroom look like? So the zones of regulation is part of the kindergarten curriculum, and that's really teaching some really good self-regulation and emotional awareness to our kindergartners. So they're really learning, when they get into the red zone or the yellow zone, what they need to do to come back to the green zone. So it's really teaching that self-awareness, and those skills to help with that regulation, self-regulation. There are a lot of seating accommodations, writing accommodations that you'll find naturally in the classroom, as well as visuals, similar to what you would probably find in your child's preschool special education classroom.
And I think also having worked for many years in elementary school levels, kindergarten teachers are really masterful at differentiating curriculum. I think in almost any given kindergarten class, you might have a child who is, reading chapter books. You'll have most kids who are just like beginning to learn their letters and maybe put words together. And then you'll have some children who are not yet doing those skills either. So there's always a wide breadth. And that's one of the wonderful things about kindergarten teachers, is that they're so skilled and, providing content and meeting children where they're at. So I think, that is something that always was, encouraging to me, to see how seamlessly our wonderful kindergarten teachers can really adapt what's happening in their classrooms to make sure that the needs of all students are being met. So we know, as I started out, that, parent engagement research tells us, and certainly our years of experience tell us, that your engagement makes a difference. I'm so happy for your children that you've decided to take some time tonight with us to start preparing for this transition and know, hopefully, a little bit more about the transition, but also where you can continue to get support and ask questions if you need it. We encourage you to start that open dialogue with your pre-K team, and certainly you can contact the Parent Resource Center if you have additional questions that we can help with. I'm going to go ahead, Emma, will you let us know when you stop the recording, and then we can just open up for questions. Okay, actually, I think I was able to do it.